So in this video we're going to be taking out the clutch and flywheel from my 96 Toyota Tacoma and replacing it with a brand new clutch and flywheel. This is a stage 2 clutch from Competition Clutch, and I have a Fidanza aluminum flywheel. Going to be replacing it with a setup from LC Engineering, which is also another aluminum flywheel, and a clutch which is probably about equal, if just slightly under, what the Competition Clutch is capable of holding. And as a compromise, I am supposed to have a slightly softer pedal, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, of course, this is kind of like brakes. Like, you'll get a ton of dust being formed. Clutches and brakes are very much the same concept, by the way. So when you're undoing this, a lot of people say wear a dust mask or spray soapy water on this. I don't know why you would want to introduce moisture to any part of this area. So I do not recommend spraying soapy water. What I would recommend is that you spray something like WD-40 or PB Blaster if you want to keep the dust down. Otherwise, just wear a dust mask. And it really should not be that big of a deal, that difficult to get this out, and that bad for your health, as long as you're protecting your breathing. So in my case, I don't even really know that I want to deal with the mess of any of those liquids, so I'm just going to go ahead and wear a dust mask. Removing the pressure plate is pretty straightforward. You'll just undo 6 bolts, if I'm not mistaken, and that pops out forward. Just support it, get it out from under the vehicle, and then you can work on the flywheel. But before taking out the flywheel itself, you'll probably want to pop up the pilot bearing. I mean, you don't have to. You can always take the pilot bearing out afterward, but I kind of leave that up to you guys. I'll probably remove it first, but we'll see. And I'll show you guys the technique I'm going to use for that. If you look at this pressure plate, you can see that the fingers here are pretty worn. Looks like the throwout bearing was really abusing on these springs. This is a very heavy clutch, so I'm not surprised. It's mostly even wear. And I mean, at the end of the day, it is end of life, so I'm going to be removing this thing. So I'm not too concerned. Hopefully the new clutch will wear a little more evenly, but again, not the end of the world. Let me go ahead and start undoing those bolts. Alright, so I'm going to start taking this thing off. Got my dust mask on. I want to say those are like size 12 bolts. Yep, size 12. And of course this thing is going to spin, so I need to come up with something. You can actually just put a screw through here and have a wrench hold this in place. What I'm thinking of doing is a little bit different. Since I have an impact, I'm just going to undo these, rotate it, and keep undoing the bolts that I can, basically I'll come in with my impact, I'll undo one bolt, undo another one, rotate, keep going, and take them all out. For the flywheel, probably do the same exact thing. So let me set up the impact and start doing that. I seem to remember that when I did this, I was holding this somehow, and I feel like when I did this on my Miata, I put a wrench on the nut for the lower pulley, for the crankshaft pulley, and that just stops stuff from spinning. But yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll undo this. First one's loose. So, yep, got a good amount of dust out of there. Try to take this off as evenly as possible, so can't fit here because this thing's too big, but can get this one, I think. Nope. Guess I'll just have to rotate this. And that bolt decided it wants to start coming out. Yeah, okay, cool. So all 6 bolts are out. Now, see if I can't pull this pressure plate off. Jiggle it side to side, kind of work it off with the pins. And there it is. Old clutch and flywheel are out. That pilot bearing looks crispy, and I can feel the ball bearings in it as I rotate it with my finger, so that definitely has to go. These are 12-point bolts, ARP forged flywheel bolts. These ARP bolts are a 13 millimeter 12-point bolt, and you're going to need both an impact to remove that with. This is obviously not an impact rated socket, but should be fine for this kind of a one-time use thing. You don't plan to use those bolts again. You should never reuse your flywheel bolts. Always change them for new ones, just peace of mind. I have my micro torch here. We use that to heat the bolts up. And I'll start with this one. The reason I'm heating it up is because I put red Loctite on them last time. So in order to soften the Loctite, you need to heat up the bolt. That just makes it a lot easier to pull out. Now we put the socket on it. Alright, bolt number 1. So you can see a lot of dust. Still wearing a dust mask. See the Loctite breaking off of that. Let's try this one. Of course, the battery on my impact is probably low. Assuming with a fresh battery, this would be a lot easier to do. All of those bolts are out. Means the flywheel should come out with a little bit of a side to side nudging. It's gone. Oh, there we go. Rotated counterclockwise. And there it is. Flywheel's finally out. Good God. That was an unnecessary pain. All this looks good in here. Just clean up these surfaces and get ready to remove my pilot bearing. Once that pilot bearing's out, then I'll go ahead and install the new components. It's now time to remove my pilot bearing. Now, I've seen a few different methods. One guy like improvised the screw as a puller. A lot of people pack grease in there. I'm not very keen on packing grease in there because then I have to deal with the mess of the grease. And every time I feel like every time I pack anything with grease, I just get grease everywhere. So I saw this method with the bread and I was initially put off by it because I'm like, man, bread? But I watched a good video of someone doing it and I was like, man, that looks so clean and seamless. Bread doesn't really dirty stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a piece of toast, and I'm gonna tap a screw in there. Now, if you're wondering what screw you can use that's the right diameter to go inside that bearing, I've got one of the flange bolts. These are the ones that hold the exhaust flange to the transmission, and these fit in really nicely. They're about the same diameter as the input shaft. So that's what I'm gonna use. I've got some tape on it. I'm gonna remove because it kind of bulked it up a little too much. Okay, but just have a little tape on the end so if it taps in there it doesn't do any damage. So I've got my toast here. I've got my rubber mallet. Do not tap your bolt that you're going to be reusing with a hammer because you could balloon out the head. So I'll be using a rubber mallet. Let's go ahead and just start packing this stuff with bread. Kind of unusual, but hey, if it fits, it ships. If it works, it works. That's the motto around here, so. All right, getting some resistance, so let's just tap it in with the bolt. Okay, let's put some more bread in there. I feel like when I did this years ago, my buddy like broke the bearing and like pried it out with all this force, messing around with like a screwdriver and a hammer. Man, we would have just beat a slice of toast into it. There you have it. Pilot bearing removal by bread, courtesy of Walmart. Now instead of dealing with a bunch of grease, I just peel the bread out of there. That bread's really in there, man. I'm pretty impressed. And fringe benefit, the bread absorbed a bunch of filth. So now this bore will be nice and clean, courtesy of bread. So there you go. There's the Wonder Bread method of removing pilot bearing. That was really cool. Now that I've removed all the bread, I'm just going to take a rag and clean out this inner bore and this outside portion. Make sure I clean up all these threads. Alright, because this is going to hold my flywheel in place. I don't want grease getting in there and messing with that. I've considered whether I should do my rear main seal. Kind of struggling with that. The kit comes with one, but it does not appear to be a genuine Toyota one. And my genuine Toyota one that's been here since 1996, right, would make you think I should change it, yet it's nice and supple and there's no indication of a leak anywhere. Right, I don't see any motor oil seepage from there, so sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you want to do it, go ahead and do it. You remove all of these bolts. You remove these 2 bolts under the oil pan. You pop this out. You can tap out the old seal, tap in a new one from the back, right, using like a 2x4. Then you put RTV silicone all around and on the bottom. Pop this back on and install it. And that's all you really need to do. But in my case, I don't know that I want to mess with that, only because this looks pristine, feels pristine. I might regret this later, but in any case, in the future, I may be doing a motor swap or adding more power, not sure which. It may end up requiring a clutch upgrade sooner rather than later again, so I'll have time to replace it then, but it feels nice and rubbery. It's not hard or plasticky at all. I mean, it's fairly rigid because it has like that like rigidity to it, but everything feels good otherwise. And again, I don't see evidence of leakage, so I'm not going to mess with that. Only thing I am going to do is clean up some filth. Now with everything pretty much cleaned off, I'm going to go ahead and just lightly grease those surfaces around here where the flywheel is going to slide on, and lightly grease the inside of this. Then I'll install the new pilot bearing. Now with anything you're going to do in here, moderation is key. So the idea is not to bathe that in grease, like completely like fill it with grease. You're just going to lightly skim the surface with a little bit of grease. Alright, so first, give it another quick wipe down. Make sure every last part of this is decently cleaned. Make sure you got no bread left in there. I'm going to do the compressed air part. When you do this, respiratory and auditory protection are key. I have pretty much permanent tinnitus at this point of my life in certain situations. That means my ears are often ringing. If you don't want that to happen to you, hearing protection is key. You don't want to breathe whatever the heck might come out of there. Eye protection is not a bad idea either. Just going to blast these boards. Alright, so I've got my brand new pilot bearing. I'll just kind of present it in the bore as evenly as I can. Alright, we'll take our 2x4, the mallet. So at this point I'm ready to install my new flywheel. Now I've put a socket, I've put a breaker bar on the crankshaft pulley bolt. It's a 19mm. You want to do that so that when you're tightening these bolts down, you won't just spin the crank, and that'll keep you from being able to torque this down. So I've cleaned this, I've installed everything. Let me go ahead and put in my flywheel. I want to try and align my bolt holes properly. Now I've cleaned the flywheel before bringing it over here. Right. The flywheel comes from the factory with a little bit of like a grease on it. That's just to protect it from corrosion. I've gone ahead and hit it with brake parts cleaner. Before I apply the clutch, I'm going to do that one more time. Let's go ahead and just thread in the bolts by hand, and then we'll go one by one and torque them to spec. Let's get the first one here. You won't be able to thread them all the way down just because they do come with a sort of Loctite on them from LCE. It's a red Loctite. I would have preferred to apply my own red Loctite, but that's okay. I'll trust theirs. Been doing this for a long time, right? So we'll go ahead and trust that they're using the right stuff. The order doesn't really matter too much right now, by the way. It's once you're seating them down that you'll be more concerned with that. I don't like that the heads of these bolts have that flange and they basically hit each other. I should have chosen a bolt with a smaller flange. Now these are a size 14 bolt, so you can just turn that down the 14mm wrench and then come back with your torque wrench and tighten them down. So that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. Alright, so let's go ahead and bolt this down. This is a lot like installing the wheels on your car. So you want to kind of go in a cross pattern so that it all seats down evenly. Now, in order to simplify that on myself, I'm going to number them. This is 1. One diagonally across is 2. One diagonally across that one, 3, 4. And you know, the pattern I labeled these in is probably wrong. I'm probably going to torque it differently. Now you're probably wondering, why am I saying that? Well, it's pretty simple. If you think about it, you should be doing is this. Here, 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 here. Alright, so if I do 1, 2, that means this needs to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now these are going to get torqued down to 65 foot-pounds, and I think I'm going to completely ignore this pattern that I drew. Fine enough for getting it down, but I think for torquing it should be a little bit different. I should be doing this. All right. Here's my torque wrench. 1. 2. 3. Yep. Everything is now torqued to spec. My flywheel is in place. So I'm going to go ahead and spray my pressure plate, my clutch pressure plate, with brake clean just like I did this surface. I'll spray this surface yet again and wipe it down, and then I will install my clutch. All right, it is now officially clutch installation time. So here's what we're going to do. First, very important detail, there is a pressure plate and a flywheel side to a clutch. Typically, to clutch disc, typically they'll tell you with a sticker that says flywheel side. If you don't know what it is, it's the flatter side, the side that sticks out more, usually goes toward the pressure plate, right? So we'll put our clutch tool here and just slide this guy over. This just kind of holds our clutch disc in place while we perform the installation. Now, along comes our pressure plate. Alright, there's some pins. Getting it over those pins is always a bit of a pain in the rear for some reason. Alright, I've cleaned up those bores. Hopefully now this will go on smooth. Just kind of pissed at having to deal with that. I guess key thing, you may be wondering if you should Loctite these bolts. You don't have to, because they're pushing down a spring. Technically acts like one massive lock washer for all of them, if you will. So no, Loctite is not a necessity. Because of how tight these stupid freaking pins are to these bores, that means that's why what I was telling you is so critical. Beyond the fact that you're compressing a very strong spring, right? It won't seat down evenly if you don't tighten it cleanly, and then you'll deform the pressure plate as you're tightening it down, and that's part of why you have so much vibration. Alright, so this part is just in order to make it easier for me to torque down these bolts. I'm gonna label them all. So the bolt here is gonna be bolt number 1. All right. The next bolt over is bolt number 4. All right. The next bolt over is number 2, because I'm gonna go 1, 2. 3 is somewhere there. 4, 5, 6. So I'm assuming that one's 3. Four, 2, 5, 3, 6. We'll just do that over and over and over again in small quarter turn increments until this thing is fully seated down against the flywheel. Alright, so let's do this. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2,
4, 5, 6. Alright, all of these things are as tight as they're going to be. Everything's seated down nice and flat. Got my torque wrench set to 14 foot-pounds, which is all you're going to need there. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
All right, the old stuff is out and the new gear is in. As you can see, my old clutch and flywheel were pretty worn out. Thought it would be interesting to look at this. You can see that there's these lines that have been pretty much worn out completely here and here. If you look at the flywheel, that's actually pretty interesting to look at. The wear surface on that is pretty much completely gone. Taking a close look at that, you can even see that the clutch disc had actually started to wear into the bolts that hold on that wear surface. So this thing was definitely not long for this world, nor was the clutch disc. So it makes sense to me that it was slipping, and really happy that I replaced it. That clutch disc was most certainly done for, and as I showed earlier in the video, the fingers on the pressure plate, which are on the other side there, were pretty scored up from the throwout bearing. Pilot bearing itself felt a little crunchy when you would spin it, so pretty much all of the equipment for the clutch and flywheel was shot and in need of replacement, so I'm glad that I've done that. Only thing left to do now is just to put the transmission back in and button everything up and put in fluid. I'll be doing that in the follow-up video. Now, if you guys have enjoyed this video, if you want to see more like it, feel free to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified when I post up another one. If you have any feedback, any comments on how I can improve this, feel free to leave that in the comments section. And as always, thank you guys for watching.